This is a Power 98.7 podcast. Now we're talking. Subscribe to Power 98.7 podcasts in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. There's more on power987.co.za.
Patrick Ayuk from the Samsoya Democracy and Human Rights Center joins us on the line to talk about the violence and obstruction in Cameroon's deepening crisis. Now, humanitarian organizations are struggling to keep pace with the increasing needs of civilians as conflict between the government and pro-independence group escalates in Cameroon's Anglophone regions, something that we've been following very closely on the show almost week in, week out. Limited access to those driven from their homes, low levels of donor funding, and what aid workers have described as government obstruction means that the majority of the 1.3 million people affected by the violence cannot be reached. Patrick, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
I'm good, and you?
Great, and thank you as always for making time to speak to us. Before we talk about this, countries like Cameroon, how are they dealing with issues of COVID-19? Or is it a situation where the violence is just too much at this point that not much is being done? The focus is on these issues that have been plaguing this region for a long time.
I think with COVID is actually a global issue that is also affecting countries like Cameroon. There are about 5 cases now, but the situation is not as serious as is in South Africa, with 274 cases at the moment. But less responsibility is being taken by the regime. You could hear the Speaker of the Parliament left France to Cameroon just to take part in an opening parliamentary session, and he was contaminated with COVID-19. So that is how negligent the country is, and there is fear that when it enters Amazonia or southern Cameroon, then the situation will be worse, because with COVID and the war going on in that area, then I don't know how I will classify that kind of situation or describe that kind of state. But it is a reality, and it is happening in all parts of the world that serious precautions must be taken.
So now, going back to our conversation, since November last year, there's been a surge in violence in the northwest and the southwest regions, referred collectively by the pro-independence fighters as Southern Cameroons or the Republic of Amazonia, something we've been talking about all the time here, with nearly 900,000 people having been made homeless and others fleeing to Nigeria. We understand just about 60,000 or so people are fleeing to Nigeria. This conflict has been going on for just about 4 years. Patrick, is there any hope now with the situation looks like the crisis deepening?
Yes, seriously, there is a lot of the situation. I don't know how to call it, but it's daring. It's a serious situation. And on the 14th of February, you heard of the Gabu massacre, where 24 civilians were massacred by the government regime because they were suspected as people who are supporting Amazonian fighters or pro-independence fighters in southern Cameroon. So that is how serious. And of course, humanitarian access is being restricted. A lot of humanitarian organizations are in serious problem with the regime, especially the International Crisis Group, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and other religious groups and local humanitarian organizations, NGO like Red Hat, which is a strong NGO in Cameroon, is being targeted by the regime, and they are frequently accused for supporting pro-independence activities, which is a lie. Anybody who speaks truth against the regime is actually suspected as an accomplice to the pro-independence activism.
So now with the situation, as we say, that just about over 500,000 children unable to attend schools. We constantly on this issue, Patrick, talk about just the humanitarian aid and what the world is willing to do to help. With now the issue of COVID-19 gripping the world. Does that affect, to a certain extent, the humanitarian aid, as almost the focus now is likely to change to this pandemic?
In somehow, we have not had such a deviation in attention. But with that situation, a lot of care should be taken. There are a lot of campaigns going on, especially pro-independence activists. The government or the government of exile of the pro-independent activists, the Federal Republic of Amazonia, they have been sending messages on social media through their local community radio, SABC, Southern Cameroon Broadcasting Corporation, trying to educate the people on how to take care of themselves with regards to COVID-19. And it is clear that with the deteriorating situation in terms of health and sanitation, if COVID-19 actually reaches Amazonia or Southern Cameroon, then it will be a regrettable situation more than any part of the world, because, as you rightly said, close to 1 million people are internally displaced. These people are living in bushes under bad conditions, women using leaves of plants as sanitary pads and other things. So it will be a very serious condition. They do not have sanitizers, do not have anything to take care of themselves, but they need to maintain basic hygiene. And how do you maintain basic hygiene with the serious and bad condition that is on the ground? Besides that, hospitals have been burned down. When this epidemic gets into Southern Cameroon, what will you do? Only about less than 30% of the hospitals are working and not functioning. Remember, Cameroon is a highly indebted country, a very poor country, and now the consequences of the war are so devastating in Southern Cameroon, so that the basic amenities that used to exist there no longer exist. I mean, hospitals, good water, other sanitation, schools are not operating. You could remember that close to 5% of the schools in this territory are operating and not functioning well. So schools have been shut down since about close to 4 years now. So if it's a very serious situation, even though kids are not going to school now, but even staying at home because they need to move around. And the sanitation situation there is poor. You see corpses littered all over the place. Mass graves are all over. People are shallowly buried. Some are abandoned because they are afraid that if you go to the owner or to collect their family members that have been killed, they will be arrested and dumped in jail. And there's a situation where the military goes into local hospital, like St. Mary Hospital, wherein a driver was shot and killed. And those that were in the hospital that were actually having treatment, and the government suspect them as pro-independence fighters or those that support the movement. They go to the hospital, pull them out of the hospital bed, and give them summary executions. So that is how daring. So when you combine these two, the calamity of the war and the calamity of COVID-19, then we don't know the right term to describe the situation.
You touched on the issue of the military and what they've been doing. I mean, there was the time when the government security forces also failed to respect humanitarian space on the 21st of Feb, where they entered the hospital campus, St. Mary Soledad.
Yes.
And again, and shooting and killing civilians, and also the military raiding safe zones, killing and arresting people. While all this is happening, I mean, what is government saying? Is it a question that they have just lost control, if one can put it that way, Patrick?
Yeah, that's simply the government has lost control of Southern Cameroon. The pro-independence activists, they are using the guerrilla warfare to actually unravel the regime. And you know that the regime misinterpreted or underestimated the power of the people. So when the people turn against you, irrespective of the military capability that you have, you cannot defeat a people. That is exactly what is happening with the regime. They thought they will crack down, they will carry out systematic ethnic cleansing in Amazonia with little or no defense from the people who are presently carrying out self-defense activities to protect the community. So with this frustration, that hoping that they could finish this thing as early as possible without the world even knowing, but now it's taken long, about close to 4 years. So there is a lot of frustration. So the government has basically lost control of that territory because these people are having control. They have their community schools, that their people listen to them. And, the pro-independence activists or fighters are basically creating little schools like community schools, having community health centers. So they are actually doing things that the population is embracing them and rejecting the regime. That is why the government massacred 24 people, especially 14 children and women in Ngabu. That is part of the frustration. That is why you have the Babanki massacre. That is part of the frustration. That's why you have massacre in Konya. That's why you have massacre in Manfe and many parts of southern Cameroon. It's part of the frustration of the regime. And that's why they are targeting everybody, all the civilians, so as to deter them. They will get into a family, arrest that family member, take him to the military camp, bring back the family member in a public forum, and shoot him in clear vision of the people. That is just to tell the people that back off, stop supporting pro-independence activists. We will kill you if we notice that you are part of them. So it is a tactic that has been used by the regime to frighten people, to deter people from taking part in the human rights activities, because the right to self-determination is inalienable right that is being supported by most people of southern Cameroon or part of the world.
In terms of humanitarian aid, there are reports also, Patrick, that are coming out that government is clamping down on more systematically on humanitarian access, imposing restrictive tracking, vetting procedures. So the workers particularly not happy, almost as if they are trying to restrict the help that is coming through from the outside world.
Yes, that's a serious problem. When you stop, if you are as cruel as a regime that stops access to people that are already highly vulnerable, then we don't know what to say again. But the situation is so harsh that we don't actually know, because the humanitarian aspect, the government suspects anybody that speaks the truth. Red Hack, which is a humanitarian organization in Cameroon, and mostly is headquartered in French Cameroon, always speaks the truth, and the government doesn't want to listen to these people. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, the Gabu massacre that happened on the 24th, Amnesty International actually and Human Rights Watch, these organizations have satellites on the ground. The government refused, said the military wasn't responsible for this massacre. But when Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and other organizations like International Crisis Group came out with glaring evidence proving that the government actually massacred the people, the government turned against this international organization, saying that they are supporting the activity of pro-independent activities. They are supporting terrorist activities in that part of the world. That is what the government does when you speak the truth, when you stand for your right. Remember, at the beginning of this crisis, government painted an image that the people protesting for their basic rights against marginalization, against a kind of colonialism, are terrorists, until the world started seeing the truth that these people, pro-independence fighters, Amazonians, are not actually terrorists. They are people fighting for their basic rights, the right to live, the right to defend your right to self-determination. And as part of it, we can also realize that Aya Foundation happens to be a local NGO that is owned by a former Chief Justice. It's giving support to both our refugees in Nigeria and internally displaced people and prisoners. This organization has also been accused by the government that it is actually supporting terrorist activities, which is a blatant lie. And they have accused it as a main sponsor of terrorist activities. So that is how the regime is. Give a dog a bad name and hang it. That is always the modus operandi of the Cameroon regime.
Fantastic stuff. Patrick, let's leave it there. Thank you very much for always making time to speak to us appreciate your contribution.
Thank you so much, and thank you to listener of Power FM.
That's Patrick Ayuk talking to us there. And I mean, imagine all this that is happening in Cameroon while you have to deal with this coronavirus. This where just simple humanitarian aid is not even allowed inside the country.
You've been listening to a Power 98.7 podcast. For more podcasts, visit power987.co.za or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.